Kלים Perches Mishnah Gimel. And we'll carry on with the dinim of toichoi, which means if you have a kli cheres, and we know that kli cheres is metame through its toich, if one can create another toich inside the outer toich, in other words, if one takes a kli, a smaller kli, and puts it inside the outer kli cheres, and thus the smaller kli now creates its own toich within the confines of the bigger toich of the outer kli cheres. And assuming also that this new inner kli, its pesach is completely outside the confines of the outer kli. In other words, it sticks inside, but it's not completely meshuka l'soicha. It's not completely inside the confines of the outer kli. In other words, it's sticking out. But what we've done is it created like a bubble of space inside the outer kli cheres. Then we have the hatzalah of toich toichai. But we said in the previous Mishnah that this hatzalah of toich toichai only works if this new bubble of space itself is created or confined by a kli. If, for instance, the new inner kli which is creating this bubble is itself a shever kli, is a broken kli, we do not have the hatzalah of toich toichai. Says the Mishnah, Sereda shina suna al pi hatanur. Tanur is our outer kli cheres, and a sreda is some sort of tray. V'shekas l'soicha, the sreda is a little bit sinking into the tanur. But v'ein lo gapayim, it doesn't have a rim. Because if the sreda were to have a rim, then this sreda would have its own toich. And of course the sreda then would be able to be matzel midin toich toichoi, because it now has its own toich, which is meshuka, which is inside the outer toich. But here we don't have a toich because it's flat. But the question is then, if it's flat, then how can the Mishnah say the words v'shekas l'soicha? We're trying to create a situation where the sheretz being inside this sreda is actually also inside, below the confines and the rim of the outer kli, the tanur. But if it's a pshuta kli 8, then if it's on top, it can't sink in. If it can sink in, then it's got a toich. So this question is taxing the Mefarshim. There's different ways of explaining this Mishnah. The simplest way of explaining this Mishnah is actually, the Chazon Ish also believes that the Baal Tanura actually means this, although he starts off saying we're dealing with a hard object, an areva ktana. The best way to explain this Mishnah is that the sereda is actually a soft, it's a leather tray. It's basically flat, but because it's leather, it can sink in a little bit into the tanur. So therefore we have a case where hasheretz b'seicha, the sheretz is inside the sreda, in that section of the sreda which is sunk into the tanur. But nevertheless, we do not have the hatzalah of toich toicha here. The tanur is still tomei because the sheretz is still regarded to be in the toich of the outer tanur. Why do we not have a hatzalah of toich toicha? Because this sreda, although it's sunken a little bit into the tanur, it is still a kli without a toich. It's sunk. It's now got a little bit of a toich, a little bit of a bubble, but the kli is intrinsically a kli without a toich, and therefore cannot be matzel within a toich toichai. And vice versa, hasheretz betanur, if the sheretz is in the tanur, oichlin shebaseicha tmein, any oichlin or mashkin which find itself in the indentation of the soft sreda sinking into the tanur, are tomei and do not have the hatzalah of toich toichai mentioned in the previous Mishnah. Why? Because the rule is she'ein matzilin miyad kli cheres elo kelim. In order to have the hatzalah of toich toichai, it must be a kli. Now this expression the Rishonim say actually means she'ein matzilin miyad kli cheres elo kelim sheyesh lohen toich. That's how these Rishonim would learn this Mishnah. Now what's interesting is, we're dealing here with a leather sreda. Now leather also imitates the rules of Kli 8 in that in order to be Mekabel Tumah, it needs to have a base kibble. But Tosfos says in Shabbos that soft leather can even be flat. A pouch, because although it hasn't got a base kibble, because it's soft, you can actually roll a couple boy, you can actually fold things in it and it can serve as a pouch. True, therefore it's regarded to have a base kibble because it can easily be turned into a klish yeshla base kibble. But for toich that's not enough. You actually need the mitzias of a toich, and because it is flat, although it's roil a couple boy davar, because it is flat, it's called the klish ein loy toich. And therefore, although we have a little section of the shreda which sinks into the tanur, it does not have the hatzalah of teich toichoi, because at the end of the day, this is a kli without a toich. The sefer of the Mishnah. This is something we mentioned in the Hakadama to the Perik at the beginning of Perik Ches. Chavis yimalei mashkin toirin. You have a chavis, a barrel which is full of mashkin toirin. We have our tanur, which is our kli cheres, which is standing on the floor. And there's a pit below the tanur. And inside the pit is a chavis full of mashkin toirin. The chavis itself reaches into the tanur. But the water level of the chavis does not reach into the tanur. The water level is flush or just below the entrance to the tanur. But the chavis is completely open to the tanur. Says the Mishnah, sheretz b'tanur, if there's a sheretz in the tanur, hachavis v'hamashkin tahirin. Because, we said this in the Akadama to Perik Ches, the way sheretz is metame kli cheres is not similar to the way a mace is a metame an oil. The sheretz is not considered to fill up the whole space of the toich of the kli cheres. The sheretz is just able to be metame the kli in which it finds itself. The tumah doesn't travel through the space of the kli cheres and metame anything which hits it on the way. It is only able to be metame the kli cheres in which it finds itself. So let's look at each of these words separately. First of all, the chavis is tar, because the sheretz actually is not in the chavis's toich. The sheretz is in the toich of the tanur on top. True, the two kelim are connected, but tumah of a sheretz and a kli cheres doesn't spread from one kli to another kli. So because the sheretz is not in the airspace, in the toich of the chavis is tar. Similarly, the mashkin is tar, because the only way the mashkin can be mekabel tumah is actually through the chavis. Even if the sheretz was inside the chavis, the mashkin wouldn't be picking up tumah from the sheretz. The mashkin would still be picking up tumah from the chavis. So because the chavis is tahor, because the sheretz is not inside its toich, the mashkin are automatically tahor as well. Similarly, we've got our tanur. This time, hoisa kafuya. We have our tanur here, and on top of the tanur has a little hole on top. And now we have a chavis outside the tanur, upside down. Hoisa kafuya, or piola avera tanur, but it's sticking not from the bottom, this time it's sticking in from the top. So the piv of the chavis is actually inside the tanur. And there's a sheretz inside the tanur. Hasheretz betanur. If the sheretz is inside the tanur, then the chavis, of course, is tahor, like in the previous case, because the sheretz is not inside its toich, and we don't mix toiches of klei cheres. But any mashkin which finds itself inside the chavis, but outside the confines of the tanur, i.e. if there's mashke tefech. Tefech means that there's wet mashke, in the sense tefech, that's the shear you need for mashke to be mekabel tumah. Shebashulei chavis, when you turn of the chavis upside down, there could be on the base of the chavis at the top, there is still some wet mashke which hasn't yet dripped down. That mashke is tahor, because again, that mashke can only be mekabel tumah through the chavis. And the chavis is tahor because the sheretz is not inside its toich.